What does it take to truly see the person right in front of you? Not the role they play, not the uniform they wear, but the soul inside? We walk through our lives surrounded by people we think we know, people we label and put into boxes. The husband, the wife, the boss, the cleaner. We see the label, but we miss the person. And sometimes, it takes the shattering of one life to reveal the true value of another. This is a story about a woman who was defined by the home she kept, only to discover her true worth when she had no home at all. It began, as so many heartbreaks do, with a lie wrapped in the mundane, a simple sentence that would unravel everything. It began with a weekend fishing trip that was nothing of the sort. Clara believed him. For 15 years, she had believed Mark. She had built her world around the scaffold of his promises, decorating the rooms of their life together with a quiet, fierce devotion. Their house was not merely clean, it was curated. Every book on the shelf, every throw pillow on the sofa, every framed photo on the wall was a testament to her love, a physical manifestation of the care she poured into their marriage. He was the breadwinner, the one who navigated the outside world, while she was the heart of the home, the silent architect of their shared comfort. It was a role she cherished, a partnership she thought was balanced and true. So when he kissed her goodbye that Friday morning, his fishing gear already packed in the back of his SUV, she felt nothing but a familiar, gentle pang of weekend loneliness. "I'll miss you," she said, straightening the collar of his jacket. He smiled, a quick, practiced flash of teeth. "It's just a weekend, Clara. The guys are counting on me. I'll be back Sunday night." Smelling of fish and regret, she laughed, a sound that felt warm and genuine in her own ears. She watched him drive away, her hand raised in a small wave, until the car was just a speck down their quiet, tree-lined street. The house felt large and empty without him, its silence amplifying her solitude. She spent the day tidying things that were already tidy, losing herself in the familiar rhythms of domesticity. It was later that evening, as she gathered his laundry, that her world tilted on its axis. He'd left the jacket he'd worn that morning draped over a chair. A dark, practical thing he rarely wore. As she picked it up, something thin and plastic slipped from the pocket, falling to the plush carpet with a faint click. It was a wristband. Bright blue, made of glossy, waterproof paper. The kind you get at a festival or an amusement park or a resort. Her heart began a frantic, painful drumbeat against her ribs. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. Printed in crisp white letters were the words, "The Starlight Grand Hotel and Serenity Spa," below it, in smaller type, "All-inclusive weekend pass, the Starlight Grand." It was the most exclusive, most expensive hotel in the state, a glittering tower of glass and luxury 3 hours in the opposite direction of the lake where Mark was supposedly fishing. Serenity Spa. All-inclusive. The words swam before her eyes, blurring into an ugly mockery of her entire life. A fishing trip. It wasn't just a lie, it was a profound act of disrespect, a casual erasure of their shared existence. He hadn't just gone away, he had stepped into a different life, a life of luxury and indulgence that pointedly did not include her. The bracelet wasn't just a clue, it was a symbol of her invisibility. She was the woman who washed the jackets, not the one who wore the bracelets. She sank to the floor, the bracelet clutched in her fist, its sharp edge digging into her palm. The silence of her perfect, curated home was no longer peaceful, it was suffocating. Every object she had so lovingly placed seemed to stare back at her, a silent chorus of her own foolishness. The life she had built was a stage set, and she had just discovered she was the only one who didn't know the play was a tragedy. The key turned in the lock late Sunday night, just as he'd promised. Clara was sitting in the dark, the blue bracelet resting on the polished coffee table in front of her, the only object in the room illuminated by a single, accusatory beam of moonlight. Mark flipped the light switch, blinking in the sudden brightness, a weary but satisfied smile on his face. He was carrying his fishing rods, and he did, in fact, smell faintly of lake water and pine, a meticulously crafted illusion. "Hey," he said, dropping his gear with a thud. "I'm exhausted. Didn't catch much, But the peace and quiet was, his voice trailed off as he saw her expression. He saw the bracelet on the table. The smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic, then a frustratingly familiar mask of annoyance. It was the look he got when she asked him to take out the trash twice, a look of weary condescension. "Clara, what is this?" he asked, his tone already defensive. She didn't move. Her voice, when it came, was unnaturally calm, a quiet shoreline before a tsunami. "I believe that's my question, Mark. What is this?" She gestured to the bracelet. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. He looked burdened. "Look, it's not what you think, the most tired, most transparent lie in the world." And it was the fact that he thought she was foolish enough to believe it that hurt the most. "What I think," she said, standing up slowly, "is that you didn't go fishing. What I think is you went to the Starlight Grand Hotel. What I think is that you have been living a life I am not a part of, and you have been using the life I built for you as a convenient place to rest between your real adventures." Her words were not accusations. They were statements of fact, delivered with the cold clarity of a judge's verdict. The shock on his face was not that he'd been caught, but that she was articulating it so precisely. He had underestimated her. He had always underestimated her. "You're being dramatic," he scoffed, trying to regain control. "It was a work thing. A networking event. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry about the expense." The lies became more elaborate, more insulting in their lack of effort. He was painting by numbers, filling in the blanks of a generic excuse. "A work thing," she repeated, her voice laced with a sorrow so deep it sounded like steel. "Does your work involve a serenity spa? Does it require an all-inclusive pass? Does it require you to lie to your wife of 15 years? He had no answer. He just stood there, a man exposed, not by a private investigator or a suspicious friend, but by a simple piece of plastic he'd been too careless to discard. The argument that followed was not fiery or passionate. It was worse. It was hollow. He made feeble attempts to justify himself, to minimize his betrayal, but his heart wasn't in it. His biggest concern seemed to be the inconvenience of it all. What finally broke her was not the infidelity, but his utter inability to see her, to comprehend what he had destroyed. "This house," she said, her gaze sweeping across the living room, "this life. I made this. I chose the colors, I hung the pictures, I nurtured every corner of this place. I thought I was building a home for us. But I wasn't. I was just decorating your waiting room." He looked at her, truly looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years, and he saw not a partner, but a stranger. And in that moment, she saw it too. She walked past him, up the stairs to their bedroom, the one she had painted a soothing shade of blue just last spring. She pulled a small suitcase from the top of the closet, a bag she'd used for weekend trips to visit her parents. She packed methodically, not with the frantic energy of anger, but with the deliberate calm of acceptance. She packed toiletries, a few changes of clothes, the book from her nightstand. She did not take the things of value, the jewelry he had given her, the expensive heirlooms. She took only what was hers. When she came back downstairs, he was standing exactly where she had left him, looking lost and confused. "Where are you going?" he asked, as if the answer wasn't bleedingly obvious. "I don't know," she said, and it was the honest truth. She pulled her car keys from the small bowl by the door, the bowl she had bought at a local craft fair. "Clara, don't be ridiculous. We can talk about this," but she knew there was nothing left to say. He wanted to talk about managing the fallout. She needed to talk about the foundation, and the foundation had been a lie. She opened the front door, the cool night air a welcome shock. "You didn't just lie about a fishing trip, Mark," she said, turning to face him one last time. "You lied about everything. You let me believe we were a team, when I was just your support staff." She walked out, closing the door softly behind her, leaving him alone in the beautiful, perfect, empty house she had built. Driving into the night with no destination is a terrifying form of freedom. The familiar roads of her suburban life gave way to the anonymous glare of the highway, each mile marker a small tick on the clock of her new, undefined existence. The life she had known was a memory in her rearview mirror, shrinking with every press of the accelerator. For a few hours, she just drove, fueled by a mixture of adrenaline and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight in her chest. The small savings she had in her personal account wouldn't last long. She needed a plan. She needed work. She needed a place to be, a place to start over from nothing. As dawn began to streak the sky in pale shades of gray and pink, she found herself pulling into the service station of a small, forgotten town. While pumping gas, her eyes fell upon a newspaper discarded on a bench. And there, in the classified section, a single ad seemed to leap out at her, a cruel twist of fate she couldn't ignore. The Starlight Grand Hotel. Now hiring. All positions. Apply in person. The name was a punch to the gut. The very symbol of her humiliation, the scene of Mark's betrayal, was now presenting itself as a potential lifeline. The irony was so thick, so bitter, it was almost laughable. For a moment, she considered driving on, putting as much distance as possible between herself and that monument to her broken marriage. But then a different thought, a spark of defiance, began to glow in the darkness of her despair. Why should she be the one to run? Why should that place hold any power over her? Perhaps this wasn't a cruel joke. Perhaps it was a challenge. To walk into the heart of her pain and refuse to let it conquer her. With a resolve that surprised even herself, she got back in her car and drove towards the city, towards the glittering tower that had haunted her thoughts. The Starlight Grand was even more imposing up close. It was a cathedral of modern luxury, its gleaming facade reflecting the sky, seeming to pierce the clouds. It was a world away from her cozy suburban home. This was a place of transient wealth, of anonymous encounters, of the very lifestyle Mark had sought without her. She walked through the revolving glass doors, her simple suitcase in hand, feeling small and utterly out of place. The lobby was a symphony of polished marble, hushed conversations, and the faint, expensive scent of lilies. People glided past her in designer clothes, their faces confident and serene. Clara, in her simple jeans and worn sweater, felt invisible. And for the first time, she was grateful for it. She found the Human Resources office tucked away in a sterile corridor in the hotel's basement, a world away from the opulence upstairs. The woman who interviewed her was brisk and efficient, barely looking up from her computer screen. Clara had no resume, no references to speak of beyond homemaker. The woman's eyes scanned the application form with a dismissive air. The only positions we have available that don't require prior hospitality experience are in housekeeping, she said, her tone implying it was a last resort. The pay is minimum wage. The hours are long. You start at 5 a.m. Are you interested? Was she interested in scrubbing toilets and changing sheets in the very hotel where her husband had betrayed her? Was she interested in becoming one of the nameless, faceless people who catered to the whims of people like him? A part of her wanted to scream, to run. But another, stronger part, the defiant spark, took over. This was not a defeat. This was a beginning. It was a way to survive, to earn her own money, to stand on her own 2 feet, however wobbly. It was the first step in building a life that was entirely her own. Yes, Clara said, her voice clear and firm. I'm interested, the HR woman nodded, stamping a form. All right. Uniform fitting is down the hall. Your supervisor is Evelyn. She'll meet you here tomorrow morning. Sharp, Clara walked out of the office with a temporary ID badge and a gray, shapeless uniform. She found a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, a room that smelled of stale smoke and bleach. As she lay on the lumpy bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling, she felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She had lost everything. Her home, her husband, her identity. But in that loss, she had found something else. A blank page. The role of Mark's wife was over. Tomorrow, she would begin a new role. Clara, the cleaner. It was a fall from grace, a descent into anonymity. But as she pulled the thin blanket up to her chin, she knew, with a certainty that anchored her, that this was not an ending. It was a foundation. And this time, she would be the one to build upon it, brick by painful brick. The work was grueling, a relentless cycle of physical exertion that left her body aching in places she didn't know could ache. Her supervisor, Evelyn, was a woman who seemed to be powered by caffeine and cynicism. She was a manager of checklists and timers, a firm believer that efficiency was the only metric that mattered. To Evelyn, the housekeeping staff were not people, they were units of labor, measured by the number of rooms they could turn in an hour. 12 minutes per room, ladies, she would say at the start of every shift, her voice sharp and metallic. Strip the bed, remake it. Wipe all surfaces. Clean the bathroom. Vacuum. No cutting corners, but no dawdling. Time is money. The hotel's money, not yours. Clara was assigned a cart laden with cleaning supplies and stacks of crisp, white linens, and sent to the endless corridors of the hotel. In the beginning, she kept her head down, her hoodie often pulled low, a shield against the world. She felt a phantom shame, a fear of being recognized, though she knew no one here. She was just another gray uniform in a sea of them, invisible to the guests who would occasionally pass her in the hall, their eyes sliding right over her as if she were part of the wallpaper. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to shift within her. The anonymity she had first dreaded became a strange kind of liberation. Freed from the expectation of being someone's wife, someone's homemaker, she began to see the world differently. She was no longer performing for an audience of one. She was simply being. And her intrinsic nature, the part of her that cared deeply about spaces and the people within them, began to surface in small, unconscious ways. She wasn't just cleaning rooms, she was tending to them. She noticed the little things that Evelyn's checklists ignored. In one room, she saw a stack of architectural magazines on the desk and a half-finished sketch of a building. As she dusted, she made sure to align the magazines perfectly, placing the pen neatly beside the sketchpad, a silent gesture of respect for the guest's work. In another, she saw a child's worn teddy bear had fallen to the floor. Instead of tossing it onto the bed, she propped it up against the pillow, pulling the corner of the duvet over it as if tucking it in for a nap. She wasn't just wiping down surfaces, she was erasing the loneliness of the room, leaving a tiny, imperceptible trace of human warmth behind. Her colleagues noticed her meticulousness, though they didn't understand it. "Why do you take so long, Clara?" one of them asked, watching her carefully fold a guest's discarded shirt instead of leaving it in a heap. "Evelyn will have your hide if she sees you wasting time on that," Clara just smiled. "It only takes a second." It feels right. She learned the secret rhythms of the hotel, the unspoken stories left behind in the rooms. She could tell which guests were on business trips, their rooms sterile and barely touched. She could tell which were families on vacation, their rooms a happy chaos of toys and snack wrappers. And she could tell which were couples seeking a romantic getaway, the lingering scent of champagne and perfume in the air. This last one always brought a pang, a sharp reminder of the blue bracelet, but the pain was different now. It was less personal, more observational. She saw the story from the outside, and she found herself feeling a quiet hope for the anonymous lovers, hoping their story was truer than hers had been. One afternoon, she overheard a young mother in the hallway, speaking frantically on her phone about a sick child back home. The woman sounded exhausted and close to tears. When Clara entered her room to clean it, she saw it was a disaster zone, evidence of a sleepless, stressful night. As she worked, she felt a deep wave of empathy. On her way out, she did something impulsive, something that was definitely not on Evelyn's checklist. She stopped by the hotel's small garden, plucked a single, perfect camellia, and placed it in a water glass on the guest's bedside table. It was a small, simple gesture. A silent message that said, "I see you. I hope things get better." She didn't know if the guest would even notice. But as she closed the door, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond her paycheck. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was a quiet guardian of transient spaces, a purveyor of unseen kindness. In her anonymity, she was discovering a new kind of power, a power that came not from a title or a role, but from the simple, profound act of caring. And though no one else saw it, she was beginning to see herself again, not as the woman who was left behind, but as a woman who was capable of leaving a little bit of light in every room she touched. Arthur Harrison, the founder and owner of the Starlight Grand, was a man in his late 70s who had built an empire on a simple principle: a hotel should feel like a better version of home. For decades, that principle had made his hotel the gold standard of luxury. But lately, something was wrong. The sheen had faded, not from the marble floors or the crystal chandeliers, but from the soul of the place. He felt it every time he walked the corridors. The hotel was efficient, clean, and profitable, yet it felt cold, sterile, like a beautiful but empty museum. His days were filled with meetings where his managers, led by the fiercely ambitious Evelyn, presented him with spreadsheets and profit margins. They spoke of occupancy rates and cost-cutting measures, of optimizing labor and maximizing revenue per guest. They never spoke of warmth, of comfort, of the human touch. They had mistaken luxury for soulless perfection. He'd taken to reading the online reviews himself, a habit that his board advised against. The 3-star and 4-star reviews were the most telling. Stunning building, but felt like staying in a corporate headquarters. The staff were professional but robotic. No real warmth, everything was perfect, but there was no heart in it. These comments wounded him more than any complaint about a lumpy pillow or slow room service. They were indictments of his legacy. He had created a beautiful machine, but he had forgotten how to give it a soul. One afternoon, seeking refuge from another soulless budget meeting, he decided to walk the floors himself, unannounced. He wanted to see the hotel through a guest's eyes. He walked down a long, quiet hallway on the 7th floor, the thick carpet muffling his footsteps. He passed a housekeeping cart, its attendant inside one of the rooms. He paused, looking in through the open door. Most of the time, he saw a flurry of robotic efficiency, sheets flying, vacuums roaring. But this was different. He saw a woman, her back to him, moving with a quiet grace. She wasn't just making the bed, she was smoothing the duvet with a care that was almost reverent. He watched as she picked up a book from the nightstand, gently wiped it with her cloth, and placed it back down, not just anywhere, but at a perfect angle, aligned with the edge of the table. It was a tiny, inconsequential detail, yet it spoke volumes. It was an act of intention, of respect for the guest's belongings. He moved on, but the image stayed with him. A few doors down, he decided to inspect a room that had just been marked as clean and ready in the hotel's system. He opened the door and stepped inside. The room was immaculate, just as the checklists demanded. But it was also sterile. It smelled of bleach and air freshener. It was a blank slate, devoid of personality. Then he entered the next room on the list, the one the quiet housekeeper had just finished. The air in this room was different. It was clean, yes, but it didn't have that harsh chemical smell. A window was cracked open just enough to let in a whisper of fresh air. And then he saw it. On the bedside table, next to a lamp, sat a single, vibrant red camellia in a simple water glass. It was beautiful. It was thoughtful. And it was utterly, completely against hotel policy. Flowers were an add-on, a billable item ordered through the concierge, delivered in an approved vase. This was a gift. An anonymous, unauthorized gesture of kindness. It was everything he felt his hotel had lost, encapsulated in a single flower. A spark of life in the sterile perfection. He felt a jolt of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. He backed out of the room and walked briskly to the floor service station, where the daily cleaning assignments were posted. He found the chart and ran his finger down the list of room numbers until he found the one he'd just left. Next to it was a name: Clara. He stared at the name, committing it to memory. He didn't know who Clara was, but he knew one thing for certain. She understood his hotel better than any of his highly paid managers. She understood that true luxury wasn't about what you could buy. It was about what you could feel. And in that moment, Arthur Harrison, the perceptive authority figure who had been blind to the solution right under his nose, finally began to see. Mr. Harrison's inquiry about the flower sent a small ripple through the hotel's rigid hierarchy. He didn't shout or make a scene. His method was quieter, more incisive. He simply summoned Evelyn to his penthouse office, a space that overlooked the entire city, and asked a single, pointed question. Who cleaned room 714 today, Evelyn? And why was there an unapproved floral arrangement on the nightstand? Evelyn, ever the gatekeeper of protocol, immediately bristled. She saw the question not as a point of curiosity, but as an accusation of a breach in her well-oiled system. Her mind raced, preparing a defense. This was a violation of standards, a waste of company time, a potential liability. She pulled up the records on her tablet, her fingers tapping impatiently on the screen. "Room 714, she said, her voice tight with disapproval. "That was assigned to Clara Bellwether, a new hire. I assure you, Mr. Harrison, this will be dealt with immediately. We can't have staff personalizing the rooms. It's unprofessional and sets a dangerous precedent. It's a clear violation of Section 4, Subclause B of the Housekeeping Code of Conduct." Mr. Harrison watched her, a deep sense of weariness washing over him. Evelyn was brilliant, efficient, and completely missing the point. She saw a violation. He saw a glimmer of hope. She saw a problem to be eliminated. He saw a solution to be nurtured. "A dangerous precedent, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. "The most common complaint we receive is that our hotel, for all its beauty, lacks a soul. That it feels cold. For the first time in months, I walked into a room and it felt warm. It felt like someone cared. And your first instinct is to stamp it out by quoting a rulebook." Evelyn was taken aback. This was not the reaction she expected. She had anticipated praise for her vigilance, for upholding the standards he himself had approved years ago. Now he was defending the rule-breaker. She saw her own authority being subtly undermined, and her resentment toward this unknown cleaner, this Clara, began to fester. "With all due respect, sir," she said, shifting into a more formal, defensive posture, "our brand is built on consistency. A guest in room 714 shouldn't have a wildly different experience than a guest in room 716. If we allow individual staff members to go off script, we lose control of the brand identity. It's a slippery slope. Today, it's a flower. Tomorrow, it's who knows. It creates chaos. Perhaps a little chaos is what we need," Mr. Harrison murmured, more to himself than to her. He dismissed her, leaving Evelyn standing in the opulent office, feeling frustrated and confused. Her world was one of clear lines and measurable outcomes. Mr. Harrison was introducing a variable she couldn't quantify: emotion. And she blamed Clara for it. Her mission was now clear. She had to make an example of this woman, to re-establish order before this sentimental nonsense could spread. She found Clara at the end of her shift, weary and wiping down her cart. Evelyn didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Bellwether," she snapped, making Clara jump. A word, she led her to a small, windowless break room. "I have been informed," Evelyn began, her voice dripping with disdain, "that you have been taking it upon yourself to redecorate the guest rooms. Specifically, room 714. Flowers." Clara's heart sank. She thought of the exhausted mother and the small gesture of kindness she had intended. She had known it was against the rules, a foolish, sentimental impulse. "I'm sorry," Clara said quietly. "I overheard the guest. She was having a difficult time. I just thought, you thought." Evelyn cut her off, her voice rising. "You are not paid to think. You are paid to clean. You are paid to follow a very specific, very simple set of instructions. Do you know what you did? You wasted time you should have been using to clean another room. You introduced a non-standard element, creating an inconsistent guest experience. Most importantly, you broke the rules." "My rules," Clara stood there, absorbing the tirade. A few months ago, this kind of dressing down would have shattered her. But something had changed. She was no longer just the woman who had been cheated on, the woman who had lost everything. She was the woman who had survived. She had a new, quiet strength. "I understand," Clara said, her gaze steady. "It won't happen again." Evelyn stared at her, expecting more deference, more fear. But Clara's composure only irritated her further. This wasn't just a simple cleaner. This was a threat to her rigid control, a symbol of the emotional, unquantifiable element that Mr. Harrison was suddenly championing. "See that it doesn't," Evelyn said, her voice a low threat. "Here, we value efficiency, not sentiment. Stick to the checklist, or you'll be looking for another job. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Clara replied. As Evelyn swept out of the room, Clara let out a long, slow breath. The cynical gatekeeper had issued her warning. The system had pushed back. But the brief exchange had clarified something for Clara. Evelyn saw a world of checklists and rules. Clara saw a world of people. And she was beginning to realize which world she wanted to live in. Mr. Harrison could not shake the image of the flower from his mind. It represented a crossroads for his hotel and for his legacy. He could either heed Evelyn's advice, reinforce the sterile efficiency she championed, or he could take a gamble on the faint pulse of humanity he had detected. He knew that to the rest of his staff, to his board, to anyone who looked at an employee manifest, Clara Bellwether was a nobody. A new hire in the lowest-ranking department. A name on a spreadsheet. But he suspected she was the key. He decided on a course of action that was unorthodox, impulsive, and completely against the grain of his own corporate structure. He was going to bypass the entire chain of command. He found Clara the next day, not in an office, but in the hallway where she worked. He approached her quietly, catching her as she loaded fresh towels onto her cart. She looked up, startled to see the owner of the entire hotel standing before her. She immediately felt a knot of anxiety, assuming she was about to be fired for the flower incident. "Clara Bellwether," he asked, his voice gentle. "Yes, sir," she said, her hands nervously wiping themselves on her gray uniform. "I want to apologize for the reprimand you received from Ms. Vance," he said, calling Evelyn by her last name. "She was enforcing policy. She was doing her job as she sees it. But I see it differently." Clara was stunned into silence. This was the last thing she expected. "I saw what you did in room 714, he continued, his eyes kind. "And in room 708, with the architect's sketches. I've been watching. You don't just clean, Ms. Bellwether. You care. That is a skill far rarer and more valuable than speed." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I have a proposition for you. A test, if you will." He explained that the hotel's most notoriously difficult guest, a wealthy industrialist named Mr. Dubois, was arriving in 2 days. For 5 years, Dubois had stayed in their presidential suite, and for 5 years, he had complained. The service was too cold, the atmosphere too stuffy, the staff too intrusive. He was the embodiment of their online reviews. "Every year," Mr. Harrison said, "we throw everything we have at that suite. The most expensive champagne, the rarest flowers, our most experienced staff. And every year we fail." "He leaves unsatisfied." Evelyn's frantic footsteps echoed down the hall. She had clearly been alerted by someone that the owner was speaking to a cleaner. She arrived, breathless and flustered, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Mr. Harrison, I was just coming to find you. You don't need to trouble yourself with staff matters on the floor." She shot Clara a look that could freeze fire. Mr. Harrison turned to Evelyn, his expression unreadable. "On the contrary, Evelyn. I'm just giving Ms. Bellwether her new assignment." He turned back to a shocked Clara. "I want you to prepare the presidential suite for Mr. Dubois. Not clean it. Prepare it. I want you to use that skill I saw, that care. You will have an unlimited budget. You will have full authority to requisition anything you need from any department. And you," he said, turning back to a thunderstruck Evelyn, "will ensure that every single one of Ms. Bellwether's requests is met without question or delay." The silence in the hallway was absolute. A cleaner being put in charge of the most important suite for the most important guest. It was unthinkable. It shattered every rule of protocol and hierarchy. Evelyn's face paled, then flushed with rage. She opened her mouth to protest, to argue that Clara was unqualified, that this was a job for a seasoned hospitality manager, for her. But Mr. Harrison raised a hand, stopping her before she could speak. "This is not a debate, Evelyn. It's an instruction." His gaze settled on Clara, who looked as though she might faint. "Well, Ms. Bellwether," he asked gently, "do you accept the challenge?" For a moment, all Clara could think of was her old life. The perfectly arranged shelves, the color-coordinated closets, the life she had poured her soul into for a man who didn't see it. All of that had been practice. All of that unseen, unappreciated effort had been honing a skill she never knew she had. This was her chance, not just to prove herself to Mr. Harrison or to defy Evelyn, but to prove to herself that the best parts of her had not been wasted. They had just been waiting for the right stage. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting the owner's. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice trembling slightly but filled with a newfound resolve. "I accept." The news of Clara's assignment spread through the hotel like wildfire, whispered in service elevators and kitchens, discussed in hushed tones over staff meals. It was a scandal, a fairy tale, a disaster waiting to happen, depending on who was telling the story. For most, she was the cleaner who had somehow hypnotized the old owner. For Evelyn, she was a usurper who needed to fail, spectacularly. Evelyn made sure to follow Mr. Harrison's instructions to the letter, but with a malicious compliance that was designed to intimidate. "So, Ms. Bellwether," she would say with a syrupy, false sweetness, her arms crossed as she stood in the magnificent, empty presidential suite. "Your wish is my command. What miracle will you be requiring first? Gold-plated towels?" A live orchestra in the bathroom. Clara refused to be baited. She ignored Evelyn's sarcasm and focused on the task at hand. She knew this wasn't about spending money or creating a spectacle. Mr. Dubois wasn't complaining about a lack of luxury. He was complaining about a lack of understanding. Her first request was not for champagne or caviar. "I need access to the hotel's guest history files for Mr. Dubois," she said calmly. "All of them." For the last 5 years, Evelyn sneered. Planning to blackmail him into giving a good review? An interesting strategy, but she complied, handing over a thick file. Clara spent the next several hours not in the suite, but in a small, empty office, poring over the documents. She read every room service order, every concierge request, every formal complaint. She wasn't looking for data, she was looking for a person. A pattern began to emerge from the noise. Mr. Dubois always ordered the same simple, black coffee, but would send it back if it was too bitter. He requested a specific brand of sparkling water, but never drank it if it was served with a lime. He complained about the scent of the lilies the hotel always placed in his room, calling them funereal. He was a man of precise, understated habits, and the hotel had been trying to impress him with loud, generic gestures of wealth. He didn't want a rock concert. He wanted a perfectly tuned violin. Clara's work began in earnest. She dismissed the hotel's floral department and instead went to a small, local market herself, using her own money for the taxi. She returned not with ostentatious lilies or roses, but with simple, elegant branches of unscented white orchids, which she arranged in a minimalist, Japanese-style vase. She contacted the kitchen and gave them specific instructions. She had found a note from 3 years prior where Mr. Dubois had asked a bellhop where to find good, old-fashioned oatmeal raisin cookies, like my mother used to make. The bellhop hadn't known. Clara went to the head pastry chef. "I need you to make oatmeal raisin cookies," she said. "But they can't taste like they came from a 5-star kitchen. They need to taste like home." The chef, intrigued by the challenge, got to work, experimenting with brown sugar and hand-chopped oats. Next, she went to the library. Guest history showed Mr. Dubois was a voracious reader of historical biographies. The hotel always left a copy of the latest bestseller in the suite. Clara found a rare, first-edition biography of his favorite historical figure, Winston Churchill, sourced from a vintage bookseller. She placed it on the nightstand, not shrink-wrapped and new, but looking as if it were waiting for a reader to pick it up again. She addressed the small details with the same fierce intentionality. She instructed the staff to brew his coffee using a specific, low-acid bean and to serve the sparkling water with a sliver of lemon, not lime. She had the heavy, suffocating drapes replaced with lighter, breathable linen curtains that let in the soft morning light. She didn't fill the room with things, she filled it with thoughtfulness. Each choice was a quiet response to a complaint, a silent nod to a preference. She was having a conversation with a man she had never met. The suite, which had started as a cavernous, impersonal space, slowly began to transform. It began to feel less like a hotel room and more like a personal sanctuary. It began to have a soul. As she placed the final touch, a warm, hand-baked cookie on a simple plate next to the Churchill biography, Evelyn walked in for a final inspection, her face a mask of skepticism, ready to find fault. But she stopped in the doorway, momentarily silenced. The room was beautiful, but not in the way she understood. It wasn't about opulence. It was about peace. It was about a profound, unsettling sense of welcome. For the first time, Evelyn's cynical armor showed a crack. She saw not the work of a cleaner, but the art of a true virtuoso. Mr. Dubois arrived like a storm front, his stern face and impeccably tailored suit announcing his displeasure before he'd even spoken a word. The hotel staff held their collective breath. Evelyn stood in the background, a small, grim smile on her face, anticipating the inevitable failure. Mr. Harrison waited in his office, his entire philosophy hanging in the balance. Clara was nowhere to be seen. She had done her work. Now it was up to the room to speak for itself. Mr. Dubois swept into the presidential suite, his assistant trailing behind him with luggage. He stopped just inside the door, his customary scowl in place, his eyes beginning their critical sweep of the room. But this time, the sweep was different. His gaze lingered. He noticed the quality of the light filtering through the linen curtains. He saw the elegant, unscented orchids instead of the usual funereal lilies. His eyes fell upon the nightstand. He walked over to it, his movement slow, almost cautious. He saw the biography of his hero, its worn cover a welcome invitation. And next to it, the plate of cookies, their familiar, rustic appearance triggering a memory from his distant childhood. He picked one up, inspected it, and took a bite. His stern expression softened, just for a second, a flicker of something long forgotten. He turned to his assistant. "Cancel my dinner reservation," he said, his voice softer than anyone at the hotel had ever heard it. "And leave me. I wish to be alone." The assistant, stunned, quickly departed. For the next 2 days, the presidential suite was a fortress of solitude. No complaints were lodged. No angry calls were made to the front desk. The silence from the top floor was deafening, and everyone interpreted it differently. Evelyn was certain it was the calm before the storm, that Mr. Dubois was merely compiling a list of grievances for a truly epic takedown upon his departure. The staff whispered that he might have had a medical emergency. Mr. Harrison simply waited, his faith in Clara a quiet, steady flame. On the morning of his departure, Mr. Dubois requested a meeting with Mr. Harrison. This was it. Evelyn straightened her suit, her face a mixture of grim satisfaction and anxiety. This was the moment of reckoning. Mr. Dubois entered the owner's office, but he was not the same man who had arrived. The harsh lines on his face seemed softer. He was carrying the biography. He sat down opposite Mr. Harrison and placed a handwritten letter on the desk between them. "Arthur," he began, using his first name for the first time in years. "For 5 years, I have come to your hotel, and I have been a difficult, demanding guest. I came here looking for something I thought money could buy, a respite from my life. You and your staff have always tried to impress me. You have failed every time." He paused, and Evelyn, standing in the corner, could barely contain her "I told you so" expression. This time, however, Mr. Dubois continued, his voice thick with an uncharacteristic emotion, "You did not try to impress me. This time, you tried to understand me. For the first time in decades, I did not feel like a client in a hotel. I felt seen. I felt like I was home." He pushed the letter across the desk. "I will not be staying anywhere else from now on. And I would like to know the name of the hospitality genius you have in your employ who is responsible for this. They are a treasure, and you should do everything in your power to keep them." Mr. Harrison picked up the letter, his hands steady, and read it. His face broke into a wide, genuine smile. He looked past Mr. Dubois, his eyes finding Evelyn in the corner. Her face was a canvas of shock and disbelief. Her perfectly constructed world of checklists and protocols had just been demolished by an oatmeal cookie. Later that day, Mr. Harrison called an emergency meeting of the hotel's executive team. He had the letter from Mr. Dubois projected onto a large screen for all to see. He let them read it in silence. Then, he turned to face them. "For years, we have been focused on the wrong things," he said, his voice ringing with renewed authority. "We've been selling luxury when we should have been offering humanity. We've been managing spreadsheets when we should have been cultivating empathy. The soul of this hotel was lost, and we were all too busy to notice. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The person who found it for us, the person who reminded me of what we are supposed to be, was not a manager or an executive. She was a housekeeper. He gestured to the door, and at his signal, Clara entered the room. She was wearing a simple dress she had bought with her first paycheck, looking nervous but resolute. The room was silent, the executives staring at the woman they had only ever seen in a gray uniform. "This is Clara Bellwether," Mr. Harrison announced. "And she is the future of the Starlight Grand. I am creating a new position, effective immediately, Director of Guest Experience. Her sole job will be to teach every single one of us, from the valets to the managers, how to see our guests not as room numbers, but as people. She will be in charge of retraining our entire staff. She will report directly to me." He then looked directly at a pale, speechless Evelyn. "And you, Evelyn, will be reporting to her." The gasp in the room was audible. It was a revolution. The overlooked virtuoso, the hidden gem, had not only been discovered, she had been handed the crown. As Clara stood there, her heart pounding, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection in the polished boardroom table. She wasn't Mark's wife. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't just a cleaner. She was Clara Bellwether, the woman who had rebuilt her life from the ashes and, in doing so, had found the power to remind an entire institution of its heart. The transformation of the Starlight Grand was not instantaneous, but it was profound. Under Clara's guidance, the hotel began to change from the inside out. Her training sessions were unlike anything the staff had ever experienced. There were no checklists, no scripts to memorize. Instead, she taught empathy. She taught them to observe, to listen, to notice the small, human details. She encouraged them to perform small, unbillable acts of kindness. A bellhop, noticing a guest's cough, would have a cup of herbal tea sent to their room. A concierge, learning a guest was missing their dog, would place a framed photo of a golden retriever on their nightstand. These small gestures, which Evelyn would have once decried as inefficient, became the hotel's new signature. The culture shifted from one of robotic service to one of genuine connection. And the results were undeniable. Positive reviews poured in, praising the hotel's unprecedented warmth and personal touch. Occupancy rates soared, not because of discounts or marketing campaigns, but because of word of mouth. The Starlight Grand became a destination not just for luxury, but for something far more valuable, a sense of belonging. Clara, the new director of guest experience, moved out of her cheap motel and into a small, sunny apartment of her own. She filled it not with expensive things, but with items that brought her joy: books, plants, and a comfortable armchair for reading. She was no longer decorating a stage for someone else's life. She was building a sanctuary for her own. Her relationship with Evelyn evolved in a way neither of them expected. The cynical gatekeeper, stripped of her absolute authority, was initially resentful and obstructionist. But as she was forced to work under Clara, to participate in the new training, she began to see the undeniable results. For the first time, she saw happy guests, truly happy. She saw a staff that was engaged and proud of their work. Slowly, grudgingly, her rigid worldview began to soften. She started to see the value in the human element she had so long dismissed. It wasn't a full conversion, but it was a beginning. She started to see Clara not as a rival, but as a different kind of leader, one whose strength was quieter but no less powerful. One day, about a year after she had started at the hotel, Clara received a letter. The handwriting was familiar. It was from Mark. He had heard about her success, seen an article about the hotel's remarkable turnaround that featured her name and story. The letter was full of remorse, of apologies, of how he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He wrote that he had sold the house, that it felt empty without her, that he realized now that she was the one who had given it life. He asked if he could see her, if they could talk, if there was any chance to start again. She read the letter and felt not anger or bitterness, but a distant, quiet sadness for the man he was, the man who could only appreciate something after it was gone and celebrated by others. She took out a piece of her own stationery that bore her name and her new title, and wrote a short, kind reply. She wished him well. She told him she had forgiven him. And she told him that she had a new life now, one that she had built for herself, and that there was no room in it for the ghosts of the past. She sealed the envelope and mailed it, a final, gentle closing of a chapter she had long since finished reading. Her life was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had built. So, I ask you again, what does it take to truly see the person in front of you? Clara's story reminds us that true worth is not determined by a job title, a uniform, or the role someone plays in our life. It's in the quiet care, the unseen effort, the spark of humanity they bring to the world. So many of us have a hidden talent, a quiet virtuosity that goes unrecognized because we're in the wrong role or surrounded by people who refuse to see it. But your value is not dependent on their validation. Like Clara, your worth is intrinsic. It's in the way you care, the way you create, the way you make the spaces around you a little bit warmer. Never let anyone's inability to see your worth define you. Your true value is not in what you are, but in who you are. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden talent, the part of them that makes the world a better place just by being in it. And look around you today. Who is the overlooked virtuoso in your life? Take a moment to see them, truly see them, and let them know that you do. You might just change a life.